What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 473. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, hello, sir. How are you?
Doing all right.
Yeah, okay? You hanging in there, buddy? We missed you last week. You had Ryan on the show.
Yeah. Ryan has it looks like he's starting to get into the world of content production, which is pretty cool. I read his article on none other than channelfireball.com, and I thought it was a pretty good thing to check out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if Ryan, of course, has come on the show recently to talk about Arena. He's kind of got all things Arena in his head, and he wrote an article about that kind of expanded on some of the stuff that we talked about. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. But it's all under the purview of his kind of take on Arena, which is trying to arm you to get what you want out of it, is the way that I would put it. Right? It's not just about going all in, because there's a time to reward equation here that's going to be different for each person. So again, Ryan went into depth on that on his article for CFB. So that was cool. But of course, we're glad to have you back, Luis. Welcome. We're going to be doing, it's that time, Luis. It is that time. We're going to be doing the Guilds of Ravnica Sunset Show. The Ravnica Allegiance is on the horizon. Next episode, we're going to be talking about the mechanics for it and talking about some of the cards and maybe some early predictions on what the guilds are up to. And but that means, of course, that it is time to say goodbye to Guilds of Ravnica, a set that had real legs to it, especially considering our take on it. We're going to talk about it a little later, but I'm somehow surprised that I ended up playing this format for so long, but I did. And we're going to say goodbye to it here. The way we like to do here on LR, that is a sunset show. But first, I want to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet, including, free articles and videos right on the front page. We mentioned Ryan's articles, but there's articles from other people as well, and videos as well from some of the best players in the world, and they're going to help you get better. We know that that's what you're here for, and you will also find some of those there. Luis, I know you've got some. I mean, if people want to be entertained, you definitely threw them a healthy dose of entertainment with some of your vintage cube streams. I'm sure that they can look forward to seeing those on the site at some point.
Yeah, those will be going up on channelfireball.com. And I had a lot of fun. I always have a ton of fun with the vintage cube. It's just basically my favorite way to play Magic. So it really comes through when I stream. For me, it's your natural environment. It's like when I picture you, right? Just like Luis Scott-Vargas, right? My friend, my coworker. Where is he? He is in the middle of a vintage cube, just doing absolute nonsense. And I will tell you, man, you really dialed it up on those ones. I was watching a lot of it live, and you have a lot to look forward to, dear listener, when you see those ones go up. They were some of the most entertaining cube matches I've seen. And while you're there, you can pick up anything you need Magic related. You can get singles, you can get sealed product, Ultimate Masters. That set's proven pretty fun, at least for draft. I found the sealed a little problematic, but the draft's been really fun. And you can pick up a box of that, or even pre-order Ravnica Allegiance once that goes up as well on channelfireball.com. Also, the show's brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's a place where you can go to support the creators that help brighten your day a little, or your week, or whatever. It's a great setup. This was a really needed middle ground for people who put a lot of effort and time into making these things, right? These YouTube videos, these podcasts, this music, comics, whatever it is that you happen to be into, and it allows it to be sustainable for the people that can build up an audience that makes it so. And that's where we're at as well. Patreon.com/limited resources. You get access to some cool new features, and you get to maybe a playmat. Let's give this one away, Luis. I grabbed the top one off of the pile, and it turns out it's actually from GP Vancouver, which is the GP I played in on the weekend. And this is a beautiful playmat. It's Amara, Soul of the Accord. I think it's just the art from that card, actually. But it's it translates to a playmat beautifully. And this one is going to go to Max Sabor, or Saber, from Bedford, Texas. In Spanish, that would be Max Flavor.
Really?
Yeah, Sabor is flavor.
Oh, cool. Max Flavor is going to take. That is sweet. Yeah. I like it. So, Max, thank you so much for your support of the podcast, and I will be sending that away along with the other pile of them that I have. I just signed up for a new shipping website, and ordered a new printer. So hopefully I'll be able to do these from home now. Also, before we get into our last Guilds of Ravnica Crack-A-Pack, I wanted to mention something that a few listeners have mentioned to me on social media. Podcast Addict. This is, I think it's an Android app for downloading and managing your podcast on your phone. It was using an old feed, really old feed, and it could be just people who subscribed while that feed was still live. But that old feed is not working anymore. So if you are using Podcast Addict or know somebody who uses Podcast Addict, make sure that you check out to make sure that the show has come out for yours. If it hasn't, if you're listening to this on the website or somewhere else and you're like, wait, this show didn't even show up on my app, you need to kind of unsubscribe and then search for limited resources again and resubscribe. So something weird on the back end there, but I got this from enough people that I figured it's worth a mention on the show, especially if you have a friend that also listens and uses that. And they said, hey, why didn't I hear the show this week? Well, that's probably why. Easy fix though. Just research again and resubscribe, and then you'll see it under the correct RSS feed. All right, last Guilds of Ravnica Crack-A-Pack. This one's kind of weird. It says Matthew, Colorado. So it's either Matthew from Colorado or Matthew's last name is Colorado. But this is a French Guilds of Ravnica pack, so I'll have to kind of figure this one out. Let's see what we got here. We have... Oh, boy, yeah. What are these cards called, actually? The Beetle.
Iron Shell Beetle?
Iron Shell Beetle. Thank you.
You remind me of someone like when I took a class in college after the final. I'm like, well, done with that class. Like you just don't know the names anymore. You're just like, oh, done with this class.
I'll tell you what, that's how my brain works, man. I have this like allotted memory, like RAM, for the current set. And once I see the new set coming out, it's like, clear that cache out. And I don't remember any of the cards. This one actually does translate directly to that though. Fine card, but no. Cosmotronic Wave, no. Passwall Adept.
No, that was a card we didn't grade very highly. A lot of people disagreed with us, and I don't think ever really did a whole lot.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it serves its role as a serviceable 2-drop in the format, but that's about its peak. That's not exactly a super sought after thing. Parhelion Patrol, fine card.
Yeah, just fine.
Bartesian Bats, as they are known.
Yeah, not a card that I'm excited to play, but it does attack for 3 in the air.
It does make the cut sometimes. I think that it's interesting because cards like Bartesian Bats and also the Okapi, the Wary Okapi, these are all the similar types of cards that have filled out the end of the line, so to speak, for limited, where in years past, even not that far back, there just wasn't as many cards like this that occasionally make it into the cut, make the cut in your deck. We'd call them a D, right? Fine card. It ends up being seen play a little bit here and there. These were traditionally really bad cards compared to cards you actually wanted to put in your deck. And I think limited is probably better for it. You just don't feel that scramble quite as much, although I'm sure some people would disagree. Gravitic Punch.
Not a card that actually did... It wasn't consistently good enough, though. The card is playable in the right deck. I don't think... I mean, you certainly wouldn't take it early. No,
definitely not. Wall of Mist. Actually fine 2-drop too, but no. What is the stupid one? The Pack. The +3/+3 Pack. Something of the Pack.
Pack's Favor.
Pack's Favor, thank you. But weird card. Should be totally fine in limited. +3/+3 is quite a bit, and Convoke is a nice mechanic. But I almost never saw it. I even rarely played around it directly. Just people didn't seem to play this card. I guess just because of green, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think that green was bad. It didn't fit in the Golgari control decks, and the Celestia decks wanted to play like 3 spells or 4 spells max, and this just never made the cut. Plus, I think other people took it higher than we did, so we just never saw them and got a chance to play them.
Yeah, and then they lost in the first round, so we only had a very small window to play against them. What is this? Atlas? What is this guy called? The Convoke, the green-white Convoke X guy.
World Soul Colossus.
World Soul Colossus. Thank you. Boy, this card ended up stinking it up. We talked about this one quite a bit because this is the type of card that could have actually been totally fine, right? Like the Convoke mechanic works well with X as it's just super flexible, and the baseline of only 2 mana meant that this thing could get huge. I mean, it could be a 7/7 pretty easily, but we nailed pretty early on in the format that the presence of multiple Death Touch creatures at common really put a crimp on this type of card.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. The other thing is that removal and card draw were really good, and so this wasn't as good against control decks. And then, of course, against Boros, you don't want to tap all your creatures, so it just didn't really have a place where it fit. Like
right.
In the Celestia Mirror, it's decent, but that's just 1 out of 5 guilds.
Right, it's a cool card. It just missed. It just didn't quite find its home. Because this was supposed to be a power. An uncommon worth payoff, right, for Celestian. It just kind of ended up not being. District Guide.
Oh, I like District Guide. I would be happy to start a draft with that.
I would too.
It goes great in my Sultai deck.
Yes, it does. Thoughtbound Phantasm.
I like that even more. This is the 1 mana 2/2 that made it so your Dimir decks could spend all their time just screwing around with Notion Reigns and not actually die.
Yeah, exactly. It always overperformed even when you never attacked with it, and that's saying a lot for a card that only costs 1 mana. All right. Well, we got some stuff here. All right. So first we have a Boros Guildgate as our last common. We have 2 rares here, and they're actually quite good. The first one is, man, why do I forget these things so quickly? The Cyclops. It's an 08 with Trample.
Right. It's like Rampaging Cyclops or something?
No, it's not that. I can't remember. Whatever. But the Cyclops I'm talking about. It gets bigger for each instant or sorcery you cast. That card's been great. I'm a big fan of it.
I mean, that's a card that Gravitic Punch actually does work pretty well with. So does Sonic Assault. So does any spell you will put in your Izzet deck. So, yes, the card's pretty good.
Yeah, there was a really nice combo with it where you could you would play like Sure Strike on it and then play Gravitic Punch on it. And it's like, all right, that's a lot going on. But if you did that, you often killed your opponent that turn just with like those 2 things because the Cyclops was so huge on the attack and you already did a ton of damage to them even before the attack happened. Now, I have Cyclops and Phantasm actually quite close. Like this is an interesting, like I put these in the arena, and I'm not really sure what comes out ahead. Of course, one of them only costs 1 mana and is really solid, but the other one is more powerful. I mean, the Cyclops, really does kill your opponent in that deck really quickly.
They kind of tie in the head-to-head because just by themselves neither can attack. But
yeah, the arena. I think
you're right with Thoughtbound Phantasm, just because it's so good in Dimir, where and it gives you something you lack there, which is a good cheap plays. Well, it's not like the Dimir lacks those, but Dimir really values them highly. Whereas the Cyclops is good in Izzet, but I think there's a lot of like Piston Fist Cyclops is also good in Izzet and is roughly the same.
Right.
Maybe it's a little worse, but
right. And you said that Dimir wants good cheap plays, like 1 mana, 2 mana plays, but this is one of the best ones, right? Like this is the one where your opponent's like, oh crap, like that thing's going to trade with whatever I want to trade it with on the ground. And if I don't trade with it, like for example, if you're playing Dimir as well, it will demand a removal spell at some point. And geez, having a card that good against that wide of a range of decks for 1 mana really does speak quite loudly. So yeah, I can definitely see, and also just sort of the idea of picking the cheaper card. It's a Radic Cyclops, by the way. But we've got another rare. It is a foil, and my goodness, this thing looks gorgeous in foil. It is Tajik.
Oh, the Blade of the Legion?
Yeah. And this card is scary. Man, if you've ever been on the bad side of this card as part of a 1-2-3 curve out, it's almost unbeatable. It's really strong.
Even if they just go 2 into Tajik and have an attack where Tajik survives, you've probably lost already. And then later in the game, it essentially has Spur Strike, and then it has some filler text that I guess could come up every now and then, though that I actually haven't seen really happen in Limited.
Yeah, prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control, which is weird and Limited because if you have a burn spell, Tajik only has 2 toughness. You're definitely pointing it at Tajik and not anything else. But anyway, I think
you just start with Tajik.
You just take Tajik here, right?
I mean, yes, it would be nice to stay open, but all the other good cards commit you. Whether it's Izzet or Dimir, might as well just make the commitment and take the Boros cards, just the best card in the pack by a good amount.
By a good amount too, yeah. All right, cool. So we'll take that, and we're going to start our last Guilds of Ravnica draft off with an aggressive red-white card. And by the way, of course, I'll put those in a little sleeve over here, and I'll start building up for the next giveaway. So if you want to be eligible for those, all you have to do is be a patron. Okay, let's get into this, Luis. Guilds of Ravnica Sunset Show. This is where we say goodbye to Guilds of Ravnica, but we do it our way here on LR, and we're going to be giving away some, I mean, calling them awards is probably a little strong, but naming some of the cards that really stood out to us over the course of the format. It's
also worth noting that because Ravnica Allegiance is the same format, not the literal same format, because it's going to be Ravnica Allegiance will be drafted by itself, but it's still 5 guilds. This Sunset Set Show does a lot more to inform the next set than normal. So be on the lookout for things that could apply towards, the next set we'll be drafting.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I almost, how like when it comes to like doing like acting or anything where you have to go out after somebody else performed in front of you, it's always like, I don't want to follow that act up. This is really interesting spot. If I'm an R&D, I think I'm like a combination of very excited, but also nervous because Guilds of Ravnica ended up being pretty darn good, and we'll talk about that here. But overall, it was well received. It wasn't an all timer, but it was a good, solid set. So that's obviously set the bar fairly high. But on top of it, we're all really, really in tune right now to things like, well, there's 5 guilds, and did you nail all 5, or is one of them a flop in limited where you don't ever want to draft it, or what are the weaknesses to narrowing down the available draftable decks from 10 to 5, right? And now there's going to be this big spotlight on like what's going to be the Celestia or the Golgari or whatever you liked about it. So, all right, let's get into this. First things first, if you could summarize Guilds of Ravnica in one sentence, what would it be?
Find the open guild.
Yeah. This set forced you to do that, right? I mean, it just said, look, there's gold cards, there's only 5 guilds. You just can't afford to A, fight somebody near you for the same guild, and B, to miss. You just can't be in the
and I think that you joked about Celestia and Golgari because I firmly believe Celestia is the worst guild, and even then, if it's open, I think it's good. So I think Find the Open Guild doesn't discriminate in that sense, even though your one sentence summary does indicate that there may be a little more going on.
Yeah, so mine was Dimir for life, right? Like, look, it's all I wanted to do before the format started. Then the format started and it was all I was doing. And then it would quickly became obvious that Dimir was the best guild, or at least the most consistently good. And then everybody wanted to do it. And it's still all I want to do. So look, I mean, I'm not going to say that that's what I learned from the set, but if I had to summarize it, when I look back, I'm just like, can I get a Dimir deck going? And if I can, I'll be happy. Speaking of, what were the best archetypes?
Dimir is it. I think being somewhere in the Grixis pantheon was the best place to be, especially since they overlap so nicely. So it really is a good time to be a blue mage if you're drafting guilds.
Yeah. And I really wonder, because, you'll find out through the course of this show that I ended up liking this set quite a bit. And, compared to some of the other more narrow archetype style builds, like I didn't like Ixalan very much, right? I remember being like, okay, I'm done. And here I kind of stuck with it, and I've been thinking a lot about why, and I've got a few theories that we'll talk about later, but one of them could just be that the types of decks that I like to draft happen to be the best, right? It could just be that simple.
Sorry, my dryer just went off.
Oh, no worries.
I got distracted.
No problem. I was just saying that, one of the reasons why I might have actually liked this set quite a bit was because blue decks were the best. Yeah. Like, is it that simple that it's just the type of decks that I like to draft ended up being the best, so therefore I like it?
So I think that the things it takes to make a draft format replayable are good gameplay. Like the actual games have to be good, which definitely were true here. And the draft portion has to have a bit of diversity. This didn't score very high on that scale, but the good gameplay can go really far, and the fact that the decks you like are the best decks means you get to have that gameplay you like almost every single time, which really does go a long way. Like, I drafted a lot of Ultimate Masters despite ultimately deciding not to go to the Grand Prix, and I drafted Madness like 10 times in a row and was just loving it. I didn't need diversity there. I just like drafting the same deck because it was really fun to play.
Yeah. I think that I'm starting to get a picture in my head of like some sort of baseline factors about these sets. Like you mentioned diversity. That's a huge one for me. Traditionally, that's been all that really mattered. I actually thought in my head that was all that mattered to me, meaning that if you could draft a whole lot of different decks or color pairs or whatever it was, that I would draft the set a lot. But now I'm starting to narrow in a little bit more because that just simply wasn't the case here. And what was it that I liked about this set? And I think you narrowed it down there. I think replayability, or excuse me, gameplay, and as well as just it happens to be that the strategies that I like were the best ones. All right. What cards were we most wrong about during the set reviews? Which cards really surprised us one way or the other?
Okay, I gotta bite the bullet. I may have overestimated how much surveilling you could do and what the payoff was. Narcomoeba was a bit of a miss.
Yeah, that was great. We had a good tussle on that one. I think we even called it out as perhaps the biggest grade gap we've ever had.
Yeah.
I think it was like B to D or something like that. Yeah.
Ugh, yeah.
Oh. Will you sign my Narcomoeba? Get used to hearing that, buddy.
Yeah.
But, you know, to me, the more interesting ones were cards that are traditionally good or bad, and ended up really changing values a lot. Like one of them that comes to mind right away is Devious Cover-Up. Yeah. I don't remember the grade we gave it, but I think just on site, I would give it like a D, right? It's like
4-mana
it's not great. Yeah, 4-mana unconditional counterspell with a little bit of upside, but the upside seems super minimal, right? We noted a couple of reasons why exiling the spell could be good with like Jumpstart or keeping creatures out of the yard, but those were still not game swinging effects. And then shuffling stuff back into your library from your graveyard seemed almost like trinket text, right? It was just like, why do I even care about that at all? Boy, I mean, I played Devious Cover-Up in every blue deck I ever ran in this format, and there were some times where it was a linchpin of my entire game plan.
Yeah, a couple of factors kind of coincided to make Devious Cover-Up really good. Because, again, when you think about it as a 4-mana cancel, that's horrible. We usually give cancel about a D, because in most formats it is. But this format was prone to go to decking. So the fact that you got to shuffle 4 cards in prevented decking both by making your deck bigger, by also putting a bunch of threats back in. And blue was really good in this format, so there was more slow deck versus slow deck action, and cancel's great in the control mirror. So this just had a couple things going for it, and it was really only against Boros or aggressive Celestia where Devious Cover-Up wasn't good, and it was really good against all the other decks. Matches are won or lost based on someone having a cover-up, and we also joked about the double Devious Cover-Up thing. You didn't actually need 2, it turns out. Just shuffling back in your 4 best cards is usually enough to close out any game.
Right. And even if you had the double Devious Cover-Up going, I don't think for me it ever actually came down to me. Like you said, it was just like you're just playing these 3 or 4 bombs out of an 8-card library or whatever, and it was over. Another one, by the way, that fit kind of in the other direction was Capture Sphere, right? Which looked like, okay, this looks like a fairly solid, approaching mediocre removal spell, but it's in blue. It takes care of any threat. It is instant speed, which meant that you could do a little bit extra with it, although not super relevant. And it ended up not really fitting. Like you could play it. Like I don't want to overstate this. Capture Sphere was a D+ or C- or whatever it was. But I would have thought, oh, you're going to play that. That's just a card that blue decks are going to want. It's a hard removal spell for 4 mana, and you're going to want that kind of card in your deck. And it just turns out that like it competed a little bit for Devious Cover-Up and a few other things at the 4-drop slot in Dimir, and it just didn't fit into Izzet because it wasn't an instant or a sorcery. And that one I found interesting because I would have thought, that's going to be a very solid playable, and ended up being maybe a notch below that.
Yeah, it looked like it was going to be good, and it ended up being just okay. Right. I think the last card here is the best example, though. Dazzling Lights, the 1-mana give a thing -3 surveil 2, looked like filler, and ended up being a card I almost always wanted one of in my Dimir decks and frequently played 2.
Seriously, that card. This is the best version of that type of card we've ever had. One of the things that really stands out about it is that it's surveil 2. It could have been surveil 1 easily, right? But surveil 2 actually ends up being, approaching a card in the late game where you just don't need lands at all. And then it had these great combos with all the Death Touch creatures around, especially the Darkblade agent.
Yeah, it just between the Death Touch creatures, the fact that there was like graveyard synergies and just straight up surveil synergies like your spy bugs and your disinformation campaigns, and just sometimes in Izzet decks, it's like this is the kind of card you can use to turn on your spells matter stuff like your Leapfrog or your Piston Fist Cyclops. It just ended up doing a lot of work.
Yeah, it really did. And I think that the lesson to be learned here, by the way, is you look, context is everything, right? So when we do the set review shows, we have a little bit of context. Like we've started to think about, okay, well, this new mechanic, what is this deck trying to do? That kind of thing. But it is really king. I mean, the fact that these cards all ended up being quite a bit different than where we thought they were going to be really speaks to kind of why we love Limited, right? We're solving the puzzle as we go. And it also speaks to, at least from the show's perspective of, what we always say, the set review is a useful starting point so that you don't go down some terrible path, but it really does require more examination and kind of constant reevaluation before you get to the truth.
Basically, when you look at the set review, because these are the cards we got right or wrong, or more right or more wrong. It's hard when it's a card that is really, really contextual, and it's hard when it's a card that has an effect that is similar to other bad effects, because most -X, -O effects are just not that good. Most of the cards printed with -X, -O, text just aren't that powerful. It just turns out Dazzling Lights had just enough rate, kind of poured into it that all of a sudden, no, this card is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we knew that. Like, if I told you, well, there's a 1-mana instant speed creature interaction spell that ends up being good, you're like, well, that's great. I mean, you just don't get cards that interact at that level. So what about underrated cards? What were some of the cards coming into the format that we were like, whatever, and ended up being cards that we played?
My favorite is Wishcoin Crab, the 4-mana 2/5. It just, again, this is the sort of thing we're never really going to get right, because you can't really, it's really hard to parse all the stats in the set, but 2/5 was just kind of perfect stats, especially for 4 mana, which ended up just coming together very nicely. And I always played the first Crab and often played the second in just my Dimir decks or my controlling Izzet decks.
Yeah. And for me, a similar one was Dowser of Lights.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right? It just ended up being just the right stats. As you can see, 5 toughness ended up being a very critical juncture. But Dowser of Lights was the most boring I would have expected. I would have almost never played it. It looked like a throwaway creature. And I played that card a lot. It was a go-to finisher and a blocker and stuff in a lot of my Dimir decks where you just couldn't get, the Watcher in the Mist or whatever. Another card that ended up going, I think, a little underrated even throughout the course of the format is Never Happened. Main deck Never Happened isn't great. I'll admit that. But a sideboard Never Happened was something I always wanted. And it was mainly because there were 2 uncounterable threats that absolutely destroyed the Dimir deck. And that was Inescapable Blaze to finish you off, or Niv Mizzet. And Never Happened is a way that you can take one of those away and sidestep that. And on top of it, take away whatever else.
So I have a question. Did you ever Never Happen a card out of a graveyard?
I did. I absolutely did. It was only when my opponent had a hand, though, and it's just their hand sucked or it was lands, and I'm like, well, I'll just take this, jumpstart card or whatever.
Yeah, I never really. I actually had that happen.
Yeah, I did it. I mean, the God honest truth is that I think the only reason that I did is because I was doing it on Arena, and it had a little pop up for opponent's graveyard, and I'm like, what? Oh, right, I can do this, right? I think if it was real life, I would have been like, oh, your hand's all lands. Okay, fine. Because it's just, I didn't remember until the game prompted me to do that. Right. What about the overrated cards? Some of them are kind of interesting. One of them, and these are always the tricky ones to talk about because, people hear good or bad rather than overrated or underrated, but City Watch Sphinx, right? This is a fine Magic card. I still played it in my decks and stuff, but you know what? Watcher in the Mist is a better Magic card than City Watch Sphinx. And that says a lot to me. I would much rather I would swap them out. Like if you could just let me swap them out at basically any point, I would have done it. And, at uncommon and ostensibly bigger and whatever, it once again shows that weakness of 4 toughness. Now, Watcher in the Mist has that too, but it only costs 5 mana and you get the effect right away. But the first time you have your City Watch Sphinx hit with Lava Coil, you're just like, oh, right. Okay, this isn't great.
I think that because it's an uncommon, people assume that it's better, right? This looks like the bomb uncommon slot. Well, in general, right, that's a heuristic people use. Like the big blue uncommon flyer is almost always good.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a card that tends to be pretty powerful. Turns out City Watch Sphinx is worse than the common blue flyer, which I actually think is not great. I think that you should probably make your big uncommon flyer better than your big common flyer, because that's a good handhold for that exact reason. And because it either means blue's common flyer is really good, which it was, or its uncommon flyer is a little lackluster. Though in this particular case, that's fine because blue is not lacking for power. So
right.
I do think that you generally want your air elemental slot, right? That's your uncommon blue slot, to be a little better. But City Watch Sphinx was not. The fact that you got the Surveil only on it leaving the building, and only sometimes because of all the Exile, Luminous Bonds, Capture Sphere effects, really is what I think made the difference. Because if this was ETB Surveil, I think you'd be pretty happy with it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I definitely would. Yeah, for sure. Capture Sphere.
Yeah, I mean,
some people didn't learn, right? They just they kind of kept just playing it.
Yeah. Like, I think even if we got it wrong in the start review, it still continued to be overrated afterwards.
Indeed. What were some of the most controversial cards? I mean, I can't lie. The one that came to mind for me was 10th District Guard.
Pick of the Pro Tour was just insane. So.
Right. It was an absolutely inexplicable, egregious, weird pick for a Pro Tour level player. It was Jeremy Dzani playing at the Pro Tour, and he picked 10th District Guard really highly and in a very weird position. And, when it comes to controversy, it generated a lot of it on social media, because people just were trying to figure out how you could possibly come to that.
I mean, we're not super high on Capture Sphere, but after first picking Watcher of the Mist, I would take Capture Sphere over 10th District Guard. Let's just put it that way.
Right. And I mean, and it got weird because then there was also a Blade Instructor in the pack, which I also like more than 10th District Guard. It was just strange. I did talk to some pros about it, and there was varied opinions. Most of them were just like confused and didn't really understand how that pick happened. But some of them kind of bought what he said, and what he had said was something that he felt like the packs were weak, and he wanted to just pick up like kind of a low to the ground, Boros aggro deck rather than trying to go for anything high powered or whatever, because he felt like the packs were weak. But it was pack 2. It's like, how do you know the packs are? I don't know. Controversy, yes. There's a lot of it around this pick.
That fits controversy. There's also Night Veil Predator, because people do hate hexproof, and especially high rate hexproof cards, and Night Veil Predator was that. Although I personally found it to be fine.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I hate it. I do hate hexproof, so maybe I fall into that camp. But the card itself felt okay. But definitely generated a lot of discussion as well. And I remember we have to go back a ways now, but Hypothesizal, when it came out, everybody was casting Hypothesizal targeting your whatever. And it was like, that's not how that works. And we had to do this, sort of learning process about this reflexive trigger, this trigger that only happens if you do something else as the spell is resolving. And while we've all gotten used to it now, people that didn't know were still just targeting things with Hypothesizal, and then people were bouncing them, and then does it fizzle? And it's, oh no, right? And so I remember people were a little confused or a little like, why do we need this? But it ended up working itself out like most of the rule stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think it was fine.
What card had your favorite artwork?
Mine was Notion Rain, which, funnily enough, looking it up, is by Lius, which is Luis with the U, I and the U inverted. That's not a typo. Lius Lasahido. I just think that Notion Rain, the whole Matrix thing, like it looks like kind of like the Matrix lines of code coming down.
Yeah, there's like these little like runes or whatever falling.
That looks very cool. I think Notion Rain's a cool art.
That is great. Mine was Leapfrog by Aaron Miller. Leapfrog, just as a Magic card, you're just like, oh, cool, it's a frog, right? But if you look closer, the Leapfrog is clinging to the side of an extremely tall building in Ravnica and kind of looking down at the ground. It is really far back. And I thought that Aaron did a really cool job using perspective there, because, again, Magic cards have this interesting thing, the artwork on them, where they need to stand out to you at arm's length when they're tiny, right? It's a little, whatever, however big the box is, it's really small. So you need to make the thing that you want to be the thing stand out from that distance. But also, we look at these so often that sometimes you do just sort of pick one up and look at it for a while. And there's often a lot more going on in that little tiny box of artwork there. And I think this is one of those examples. Also, I really like he used I don't know, kind of like a photographic technique on this thing too, which is, make your eye leads to the eye of the frog. Like if you just look at this, your eye will end up on the frog. And that's usually very intentional, kind of everything pointing to that. So great job.
You went a little deeper there than I did.
I might have, yeah. But, I've been doing photography for a really long time, and my eye sees things this way. So when I see artwork that kind of hits those notes, I like to point it out. What were the best build-around cards in the set?
Disinformation Campaign, if it even counts,
sure.
Because
it does. It totally counts. We have to.
Every Dimir deck just has a bunch of surveil cards in anyway. Like,
I know.
I almost don't count this as a build-around because it did not change your pick orders or what cards you put in your deck very much.
That is true. That is true. Although you did have to pay some amount of attention. And look, just because they made it easy doesn't mean it's not a build around, right? I mean, this is a card that if the only text on it was they discard and you draw, you wouldn't be very happy with it, right? And so you do have to have the things around it to make it work. They did make it too easy. There's so much surveil tacked onto every card in this set that put it in your deck, like you said, just didn't really change that much. You were just happy to have it, and you would often trigger it multiple times. And if you cared to, you could even trigger it most of the time because, like, I think we talked about it before, right? But the only two cards that you wouldn't main deck that had surveil were Barrier of Bones and Mephitic Vapors, right? Like everything else.
And now that Arena's best of one,
put in your deck.
Mephitic Vapors back in the main deck.
It is. Probably Barrier of Bones too. You can chump block their Maniacal Raged 1-drop or whatever for a turn and then live. Yeah, but I mean, and obviously we this is a category for best build around, and I mean, Disinformation Campaign was a house in this format. Oh, yeah. This is not the last time that we will be talking about it. Another one though that I really enjoyed late in the format and mostly on stream was Guild Summit. Lets you turn your gates into card draw, basically. And when you get this thing going, it is sweet. It is really fun, really cool, really powerful, and it has a very high and very costly setup cost. And sometimes you pay it. And I mean, I've drawn 5 cards. In fact, probably my highlight of the format, just like as a snapshot, was I was streaming from Atlanta. And I drafted the Guildgate deck, and I played Guild Summit with 5 untapped gates, and I tapped all of them, and I drew 5 gates off of it. I was like, yeah, we are committed to the cause. And that was a super fun deck. So I really like Guild Summit, but when it comes to, day 2 of a GP or whatever, it's not really on my radar.
Yeah, I thought Guild Summit was fine. It wasn't great. I have played it, enough times to think it's good, but it needs a unique deck. I noticed you didn't put a Glaive of the Guild Pact here.
I did not. In fact, maybe I should make that my most soapboxiest card. Interesting one. Really interesting. I think that, Glaive ended up having a real home in the format, right? Like the Rats and Cats deck that you pointed out on the show a while back, it was really good for it. It really was. You were often splashing anyway. You wanted to play some gates, and you'd put a couple of extra ones in there and turn those Rats and Cats into legitimate threats, either blocking or attacking down the stretch. The times when I didn't like it were in the Guild Summit deck. Yeah. It is a powerful effect, but that deck rarely had lifelinkers to put it on, which is what you really want to do in that type of scenario. And if that's not the case, it's not that you don't need that to win the game. You have 5 extra cards in your opponent. You can just attack them with a Dowser of Lights or whatever.
I think that the Glaive had its day in the 3 or 4 color Golgari decks, but. Yeah, but not in the blue Guild Summit decks that try to kill with the Gargoyle Sentinel or whatever it's called. I also have forgotten these card names.
You cleared out your RAM, did you?
Yeah, getting ready for all the Vintage Cube knowledge. No, sorry, that's part of my DNA at this point.
Right, I was going to say, I think you saved that on your hard drive. What is was this at a Prince or Pauper?
Oh, definitely Pauper. You could beat someone with all commons very easily, whether it's a Boros deck with just a good curve and a bunch of Skynet Legionnaires, or a Dimir deck that had 2 Devious Cover-Ups, a Notion Rain, and some Deadweights and Deadly Visits. You did not need the rares. And in fact, even the great rares, there were some bombs, obviously, but it was nothing. There was no Glorybringer or Tetsamok.
Right. Totally. I love that. That might actually be another contributor to, the duration that I end up drafting a set. All right, Luis, we're going to peak a little early here. What won? Everybody knows what won for biggest groan test in this. Luis wrote the name of the card and then some colorful language surrounding it as well.
Obviously, Disinformation Campaign. That card is just the dumbest. It was funny because after our sealed episode, people pointed out that MJ thinks Disinformation Campaign is the best card in sealed you can open. Like, literally best.
And it's an uncommon.
It's just unbelievable. Disinformation Campaign was just... I think that the draft experience of Guilds of Ravnica would be visibly improved if you remove Disinformation Campaign from the card file.
Yeah, I mean, you hate this card, right?
I think it's just really unfun to play against.
Yeah. Yeah. This was such a hard lock. Like from a month ago or 2 months ago, Groan Test was just penciled in as Disinformation Campaign. What was the most frustrating, quote, bad card to lose to? I know for me, one of them that came up occasionally was like 3 Vidalcan Mesmerists all attacking and making your whole team just, 0 powered things and getting in for 2 or 4. Oh man, I love
the Mesmerist invert and vent combo though. That was great.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too. That's 2, quote, bad cards to lose to. Although, Invert and Event found a bit of a home, but still, that's an unconventional combo. And then, of course, I don't know how bad card I'd put this, but Maniacal Rage, losing to that always just felt bad, right? They're just like this, and then you're sitting there looking and going, well, I can find a removal spell, but if I don't, I'm dead in 4 turns, and sometimes you didn't.
Yeah, I think that it was a fine card, but you losing to it does feel bad. Like there's no aura that has ever existed besides like on Sarah's Wings that when you lose to it, you feel like, yeah, that's reasonable. Auras, like almost by definition, are trying to mize you out. At least on Sarah's Wings was obviously a bomb. Maniacal Rage is like, God, really? Do I not have an answer to this?
Yeah, Maniacal. How about this? We'll upgrade it to Maniacal Rage on Torch Courier.
Oh, yeah. Well, Torch Courier was also a really bad one to lose to, which I have. Yeah. Like when they go turn 1 Torch Courier, turn 2 like Sunhome Stalwart, and it's like, yeah, I guess you built yourself a 2/2.
Yep. With an activated ability. All right. This one changed for me over the course of the format, but what was the bombiest bomb, the hope, the card you wanted to open the most in your draft?
It was Niv Mizzet. I think even after all was said and done with red, 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 blue, 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 Niv Mizzet was still the card I wanted to open. Niv Mizzet still did everything.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned this pretty, I don't know, a few weeks into the format, and I was still on Doom Whisperer as the best for those color considerations. But as the format went on, Niv Mizzet just hit the battlefield a lot, right? Like it's still tricky to cast.
3-color Niv Mizzet decks.
Yes, and I have played them. So the fact and the fact is that if you're surviving that long, Niv Mizzet just ends the game so quickly, and in your worst case scenario, they use a removal spell and you get a 2-for-1, and that's your basement. It's just absurd. So I'm with you. Niv Mizzet Perun, best card in the set as far as bombs go. All right. Now, what about for commons? What was the best common for each color?
So for white, I had Luminous Bonds. For blue, Watcher in the Mist.
Mm-hmm,
for definitely. Black, it was, I think, just legitimately a tie between Deadweight and Deadly Visit. I think some people will go one way, some the other, and even though I tended to pick Deadweight a little bit higher, I don't think you need to call one better than the other.
Yeah, but for what it's worth, I was the same. The first Deadweight was worth slightly more than the first Deadly Visit, but if you flipped the coin, you probably weren't doing it, too bad either way. But the cheap interaction on Deadweight just prevented those, Torch Courier draws or whatever that we were talking about, where Deadly Visit was a little more replaceable down the line. What about for red?
Direct Current, though, I could see an argument for Wojak Bodyguard.
Bodyguard ended up being good, but I definitely have Direct Current above it.
Yeah, and then. For green, I have Iron Shell Beetle.
For green.
I mean, look. Here's the thing.
What's the competition?
There's Prey Upon, which you would think would be good, but I just don't think what ended up being good in this set. Siege Worm also didn't end up being very good in this set.
No,
and then Generous Stray. That's where we're at. I mean,
that's where we're at.
Foragers. These cards are all the same, and this is part of the reason green was weak, right? Is that its best common, or even if its best 5 commons were all like worse than like Demir's 7th best common or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that is sad. Shell Beetle taking the crown. Now, what about for each guild?
Yeah, I did.
Because we did have gold cards at common here.
For Boros, easily Skynet Legionnaire. Golgari, Rhizome Lurcher, which not that impressive, but I think is a little better than the Gorgon. For Dimir, Artful Takedown, just because removal is great.
And this was very good.
Yeah. I mean, Whisper Agent's also really good, but I like the Artful Takedown. And then is it a pretty easy Hypothesis? Oh, that card was awesome. I love splashing it in Dimir also. And then for Celestia, Rosemane Centaur, which actually ended up being pretty good. Like Siege Worm was bad, but Centaur had the right stats and cost to be good.
Yep, it did. And those are, pretty solid, although you do start to see some of the gaps, right? Like when one of them is Artful Takedown and another one is Rhizome Lurcher, it's like, ugh, right? I mean, Artful Takedown is just always good. Rhizome Lurcher is like medium most of the time. Yeah. What was the mythic uncommon for this set?
So I originally put Chemist's Insight, but then you put Murmuring Mystic, and I'm like, okay, yeah. So Murmuring Mystic is better. I would rather start a draft with that. I did think Chemist's Insight, the fact that it was splashable means that it goes into a lot of decks, and I found it to be very hard to beat.
Yeah, I sent you a pick. I can't remember what it was. It was Chemist's Insight and some other pretty good card. And I'm like, I took Chemist's Insight here. That's fine, right? And you were just like, LOL. Of course, dumbass. That's the pick easily. I was like, okay, good. I'm freed. Although I did realize I was asking the person who's known for loving divination if I should take a double divination, but still, yes, I agree. But Murmuring Mystic was just the stone nut. God, that card's great. What a sweet one too. And I still stand by what I said kind of in the middle part of the format, that it's truly amazing in Izzet and merely great in Dimir, but still just a first pickable. It's better than a lot of the rares. So it's about as good as it gets for an uncommon. What was the worst card in the set, the biggest brick, the most last brick?
I think Unmoored Ego, and part of that is that people always constructed these scenarios where they thought it would do something, and then at the end of the day, it never did. I don't even think anyone actually put it in their deck, but people love to talk about it. They love to think
they'd love to talk about these
what
cards.
If they're splashing black and you get all their black sources? They have 3 Gold Gates or something like that, and it's just
and then they just drew 3 cards or whatever.
No, let's just not play this card. Can we agree to that?
Yeah. The real problem, of course, with cards like this are that they're not even good if they're just stripping those cards away because, you're using a card to do it and they're not even losing any. But this one says then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So if you do happen to nail anything, then they get the cards back anyway. You might be improving their hand somehow. It's just ugh. Not good. So Unmoored Ego out. What card was the most begrudgingly playable? Just fine. I guess I'll put this in.
Fearless Halberdier is pretty high on that list. Boros decks that needed a 3-drop will just put this card in their deck. But every time I played against this card, I'm like, I'm not going to lose. And sometimes I did still, of course. But I would get annoyed if I lost to the Fearless Halberdier. Though it's a fine card.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that it represents sort of the new low, which is still, vaguely playable. By the way, green is kind of littered with begrudgingly playables like Wario Copy and Wild Ceratok and stuff. It's Pax Favor. No, not Pax Favor. The one I'm thinking of is I really did forget all the card names. The stupid one that makes a 2/2 or blows up an artifact. Sprouting Renewal.
And then there's Dev Card and Dissonant. There's just a bunch of all the green cards are tied for last. That's just all of them.
Yeah, they really are. All right. Is there a card you will miss drafting?
I think that Devious Cover-Up is pretty high. I didn't want to put it as the answer for everything on the list, but I really did enjoy winning with Devious Cover-Up. It just, I don't know, just something about it was really fun. And then I also did Guild Summit and Hypothesis because just cool card draw engines that had a couple different twists going on. So I liked all those cards.
Mm-hmm. I had an opponent discard a land to a Hypothesis at the GP.
Ooh, that did not end up well.
I called a judge. They were able to take it
I don't
back.
think you can even do that.
You're not even allowed to. Yeah, I'm just let's just figure this out with a judge. All right. So this is perhaps a small genius or grifter moment for me, but the card I'll miss drafting, Disinformation Campaign and Night Veil Predator. Does this make me a bad person?
No. I think it's fine. Because I think that people of all skill levels should enjoy winning drafts. So it.
They put these in so I can finally get a trophy. Is that what you're saying? Oh my God, what a dagger! I probably deserve it.
I think it's totally fine.
This is my answer.
Yeah, these cards do limit the amount of interaction you can have, but sometimes it's nice to put one at the win on a Jade Guardian and feel like you're doing your thing.
God, all right, whatever. What was the LSV-ist card? And the
I think Chemist's Insight for me for sure.
Yeah, yeah, pretty easily, right? You Love Divination. Well, how about twice, right? It's like it's the easiest. Also, it was just really strong. Mine was Crackling Drake, actually. I really enjoyed Crackling Drake. It rarely felt broken in limited, meaning it was like not often that it was like a 7/4 when you cast it, right? But it would grow eventually to be quite large. And then just getting a cantrip on like, say, a 1/4 or 2/4 flyer for a pretty tough mana cost, I think is really cool. Affects the board, keeps you going through your library. That is my kind of card for sure. So I put Crackling Drake. My Soapboxiest card, we talked about a couple of them already. I took one step up on the soapbox already, but this one's actually different. It was Erstwhile Trooper, which, I don't really care about the card itself. This was the gold. The thing that I view this as is this was supposed to be the Golgari common, right? This was the gold, green black cheapish common that was supposed to do things like some of the other cards that we see in the set, at common. Like Goblin Electromancer or whatever, right? Cards that, Darkblade Agent, perfect example. Same converted mana cost of 3, right? Yet Erstwhile Trooper was hot trash. It did nothing. And I'm like, what? How did this end up being the go-to gold common for Golgari? And, maybe I'm scapegoating it a little bit here, but I look at cards like that and I say, this is why Golgari failed, right? This is why the mechanic, the guild ended up not being as good. It's because you get Erstwhile Trooper and I get, Darkblade Agent. And it's just not a fair game. Close. Right. It's just not close. And then on top of it, before I step down from my soapbox, I hate it that it makes you discard a creature card, because I think not only just for me, an experienced player, but also a newer player, that's a feel bad. Right? I wanted to cast that card. It's kind of like Surveil. It's like, oh, you can surveil creatures into your graveyard. You know what I never did? Surveil creatures into my graveyard because I wanted to draw them. And with Erstwhile Trooper, I want to cast them from my hand, and instead I'm pitching them for some temporary onboard advantage. And I get it, right? There's a trick here that, okay, well, that lets you get creatures in your yard, and then you can take advantage of that later. But it turns out pitching creatures into your yard for a minimal onboard advantage was just a horrendous idea, and this card actually encourages you to do it. So Erstwhile Trooper, I don't like you very much.
Yeah, it is not a card that really paid off.
Right, and I feel like sometimes you pick one kind of an icon for something that you like or don't like. This is my dartboard moment for Erstwhile Trooper. So sorry, buddy. Where were we? All right. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you? I said Mnemonic Betrayal, right? Which is the whatever the stupid cube card.
It's the Yawgmoth's Will Your Opponent card.
Thank you. Yeah, the Yawgmoth's Will Your Opponent, which I think is a really cool card, by the way.
Totally fine.
And I even played it once, and it was sweet. Yeah, but I do have to go, all right, now what do I get to do? And, the truth is that once you get it, it's like, okay, it's Yawgmoth's Will Your Opponent, and you can just use any color of mana. Like, it's an easy card to explain to somebody if they know what that card does. But, it's a mythic, and it isn't super playable. So when it does come up, it's like, all right, give me that thing. What are you doing again? And then, you have to exile it and a bunch of little stuff, too. But card was sweet. What was your most drafted card on Magic? It's funny because we have Arena, but like I don't know how many I drafted on Arena because the fifth ones just get auto dusted or whatever. But what about on
Dimir Guildgate? But also every Dimir common. I think the biggest streak I had was drafting Dimir 5 times in a row, which might indicate that maybe it wasn't open all of those times. But I had a pretty good win rate on there, and I did well at the Pro Tour in the same format. So who knows?
I assume it was just open every time. Yeah, for me, it was a tie between Hypothesizzle and Notion Rain, which I was kind of stoked at that, to be honest, because those are both cards I do take very highly. What was the biggest miss in this set? And, a little foreshadowing here, but Golgari in general, right? As an example, not just Erstwhile Trooper, but another good example is Golgari Raiders as a card that really missed in this set. That's for people that don't remember, because it almost was never on the battlefield. It's 3 and a green for a 0/0 with haste, and it has Undergrowth that gets a counter for each creature in your graveyard. And I mean, this thing looks like it was meant to be like the big uncommon payoff, right? Like I know it sounds weird, but this is the Murmuring Mystic for green, right? This is like a place where you can put a decent amount of power. You know what I mean? Like this is a place where you can dump a good chunk of power, right? With one of the core mechanics and really kind of and kind of flex that muscle a bit here. And instead, since the whole tribe kind of missed entirely, it's basically a sideboard card. I think I saw one of them that was relevant in the format and it just never saw play. And that to me is a big miss, right? Because these uncommons are really places to kind of show off and really show what a mechanic can do. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I think the fact that not that Golgari was actually that low in power level, like, this kind of goes into the next question, which is from a design development aspect, how did the set fare? How are the mechanics? What were the wins and the losses? One of the losses is that Selesnya missed on power level and Golgari's theme was a complete miss. What that means is that I think Selesnya as a guild just was the worst guild. And yes, it was still draftable. That part is good. Like it means it wasn't a 0, but it was noticeably worse than the rest, which I think is kind of unfortunate. You'd rather than be like relatively close. And then Golgari, even though the Golgari decks were good, Undergrowth decks weren't good. It just wasn't a thing. And that was a pretty unfortunate kind of like circumstance to end up in because just one of the guild's mechanics just made no impact and was kind of a running joke. Because Golgari Raiders, the on one of the uncommons with your ability, it's supposed to be like, that's what I hope to open. I hope to open a good Surveil card when I'm in Dimir. I hope to open a good Mentor card when I'm in Boros. I hope to open a good no, there's no good Undergrowth cards. Lotleth Giant.
No. Right. And that one was fine, but still not. Yeah.
So so that was unfortunate. Overall, I think how the set fared is, it was pretty straightforward design. It would have been nice to see a little bit more risks, but because the guild mechanics were like Convoke again, Surveil, which is very close to Scry, and Mentor, which was cool for sure. Undergrowth, which could have been cool, but even then wasn't like doing something very different. Like you could just write the text on you could write out the text and it would just look like a normal Golgari card, even without the mechanic. And then, what is the last one? Which one am I missing? I'm missing Jumpstart, which was, again, a take on Flashback, right? But at the end of the day, the gameplay matters the most, and the gameplay was very good. So I think that Guilds of Ravnica was a success. I think it was a cool set. I think that people enjoyed playing it. I know we both did. So I guess one of the lessons here is that it doesn't need to be too complicated.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you bring that up because the fact that they kept it somewhat close to the vest probably is a big reason why we enjoyed it. Like these are proven formulas that work and they put interesting twists on them. They didn't reinvent the wheel, but Jumpstart was just different enough from Flashback that it's like, okay, I got to manage my resources in a little bit of a different way. Or, it's cool that Jumpstart cards work well with each other where you can pitch one to, another and then Jumpstart the other one later on. Like there's some neat little stuff going on. Surveil was just different enough from Scry with the, graveyard synergies and stuff. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind seeing something a little more flashy, I suppose. But I would have settled for just kind of nailing sticking the landing on all of those, right? I think that would have been, because I don't think Convoke was a failure in this set, but Selesnya was, right? So that means there's power level stuff or, it needed more trample. That would have been, quite good, for example, in this one. And then, boy, if Airswell Trooper was just like, I don't know, a 3/3, a 2/3 or whatever, and it said mill yourself for 3 when it enters the battlefield, it just would have been like 10 times better, just something along those lines. What did the format teach you? How did it make you better at limited? What are the takeaways? For me, it was really interesting because the set actually had legs. I drafted it up until the very end. I would draft it right now. Like I would be happy to sit down and do a draft of it right now. But by the metrics that I usually like, it really shouldn't have. Some of the things that I'm paying more attention to now after having this set for this long and me still being interested in playing it are great gameplay that you mentioned, Louise. It might just make up for a lot more than I realized. Because this format did feel kind of solved from a draft standpoint relatively early, right? Like when you went on the show and said, I think that Selesnya is worse than Golgari, that was still quite early in the format. And that proved true. And, from then it hasn't really changed that much. At least for me, the ranking of the guilds and the types of decks that I'm trying to draft have been pretty similar. And that's a really long, I mean, it's been months now where that's been the case. And to me, that is a recipe for me to not like the format anymore, to just get bored of it and just be done with it. So why do I still like it? You mentioned it, and I just did the great gameplay. But also, I think we might have struck something here earlier where we were talking about the fact that these blue-based kind of tricky, cool strategies ended up being the most powerful. And that's kind of what I want to do anyway. If Selesnya and Boros were the two best decks by a lot, this format might not have had the same legs for me that it ended up having. So there's probably some pretty strong personal preferences being splashed in there.
I think that the biggest thing to keep in mind from this format and going into the next one, Ravnica Allegiance, is that know how to go from guild to guild, know which cards kind of straddle two guilds, like which, because like Azorius and Orza, right? Blue, white, and black, white. Know which cards can go in both those decks so you know how you can keep a little bit more open. Because I suspect finding the open guild is going to be the most important part of drafting Ravnica Allegiance, and knowing, part of the reason I like Chemist's Insight so much is it was great in every blue deck and even splashable in non-blue decks. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason that I wouldn't want to first pick a Sky Knight Legionnaire compared to a Deadweight, even though Legionnaire was better once you're in that deck, is that Deadweight can go in Golgari or Dimir and be very good in both. So you do have to kind of figure out how to keep yourself as safe as possible when there's so many fewer archetypes available to draft. 5 to 6 instead of something like 9 or 10.
Right, and realistically, we might be on 3 to 4. That's kind of what
I would imagine that it's probably 5, but I just because I think it's easy to make sure that one of your guilds isn't a complete miss, but I bet that 2 are better than the other 3.
Okay. Yeah, I'll settle for that all day. Just keeping them in the same ballpark makes it so that the naturally self-correcting part of draft kind of kicks in at that point. Last question. What was our favorite card in the format? What was it for you?
I feel like people can guess both of our cards based on our previous answers, but mine was Devious Cover-Up and yours was, of course,
Nightveil Predator. I decided not to put Disinformation Campaign, even though it was probably my actual favorite card, because I didn't want people to think I was a bad person. So I went with the next worst thing, which was Nightveil Predator. So, yeah. Anyway, but these were certainly near the top. And I think it's sweet that Devious Cover-Up ended up being your favorite card, too, because it's such an unassuming card. In fact, one that we didn't even give a particularly high grade nor thought would be much of a factor in the format. So that is sweet. That is going to do it, though, for this one. We're going to say goodbye to Guilds of Ravnica. So again, good. What would you give it? Would you give it a grade? I mean, it's like a B, right?
I would say it's a B+. I think that this is an above average set. It's not as good as Dominaria, but Dominaria was, kind of like a once in every couple of years caliber set. Though, who knows? Maybe we'll just get a bunch of home runs in a row.
Yeah, totally. And I'll tell you what, if they keep putting out sets of this quality level, I will be happy with that, because even though I didn't think I would like it based on what I know about it now, I do. And I'm happy about that. That is going to do it for this episode. So again, next week, we're going to come back and we are going to have the mechanics. So we're going to go over all of the guild mechanics and then also give some predictions and some initial insight into what the guilds are doing. And then the next week after that, boom, set review time. You're not going to want to miss that one. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Anything you need Magic related is there. And that includes selling your cards back. It's kind of this ecosystem that you can do where if you want to sell your rares that you're not using anymore, that you open in drafts back to Channel Fireball, boy, oh boy, plus 30% trade-in. So if you're going to use that money to buy more Magic cards anyway, you may as well take the free value. It's plus 30%, and you can use that to get pre-orders of Ravnica Legions or a box of Ultimate Masters or whatever it is that you need. If you're not going to use those rares in Constructed, send them back to CFB. That is the way to do it. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So now that we're giving out awards, I think it's time for the 2018 Limmies. These are the Community Resources Awards.
The Limmies are back. I love the Limmies.
The Limmies are great. Yeah, well, let's just kick things off. What's the worst grade of the year?
Well, it is topical, Luis, for this episode. You win it. It's Narcomoeba. Congratulations. You got the worst grade of the year.
Hands down, there was nothing else even nominated. Speaking of no nominations, for best grade of the year, nothing actually stood out to us.
No.
You could interpret this in multiple ways. One is that we didn't grade anything well and we consistently miss. The other, the more charitable interpretation, is that we graded everything so excellently, nothing stood out.
Right. I will take either of those interpretations.
The Hungriest Co-Host Award goes to Luis.
Oh, you won again?
Marshall, yeah.
Wow, you've got a streak going.
Speaking of streaks, the Tallest Co-Host Award for the 5th year running, Marshall.
Hey, I did it.
The Most Embarrassing Draft Pick. So we actually dodged on this one too. I think that we managed to redeem ourselves fairly well and draft, in a more disciplined fashion. So it's good. That's kind of like a Razzie. We don't want to win it,
This is the one you put in just to nail me to the wall on that stupid Chupacabra pick.
Yeah, that's true. Best set of the year, hands down, Dominaria. Yep. Certainly what was the set we all loved. Most valuable contributor guests, Ryan Spain.
With a late year run. Yeah,
he came in out of nowhere and, guesting on multiple episodes and, of course, being one of the co-founders of the show. So pretty easy win there for Ryan Spain. The most valuable contributor to sign-offs is I believe, repeat champion in Ben Stark.
He never gives up.
No. Him and Shahar basically kind of passed this trophy back and forth.
That is true. Yeah, they both all you have to do is hang out with them and they'll just generate sign-offs.
The most valuable episode by popular claim would be, of course, Unlimited Resources.
The one I wasn't on, the only episode of LR I wasn't on ever.
Yeah, that is actually weird now that you mention it.
Wow.
I wonder what the correlation there is. Anyway, the sweetest episode, not the most valuable, is, of course, the Alpha set review with TBS. We had a lot of fun with that one.
That was really good, yes. An honorable mention, at least based on feedback, goes to that special one I made, the one with Huey and Ben.
Oh, yeah, right. The deep dive or what have you.
I still get feedback about, I put all that work into that episode, and I'm really glad I did, because I'm still getting people saying, hey, I listened to that for the 3rd time or whatever, so I'll just pat myself on the back there. And Huey and Ben.
Best card name, the real Slinvoda, the Rising Deep.
That is great, yes.
The sweetest build around is decking your opponent with a Devious Cover-Up.
Absolutely. Yes, because it's not obvious, right? Yeah. It's not like, oh, I did something that was on the card. This is just a sweet alternate win condition.
The the most disappointing build around was Golgari Undergrowth. I think that just didn't get there at all. The sweetest archetype, Madness in Ultimate Masters. I think that you were asking me, hey, is Madness the Bazaar any good? And I sent you that tweet that I had of discarding Reckless Worm, Fiery Temper, Basking Root Walla. So that was pretty great.
By the way, I put it in my deck.
Oh, yeah.
As a result of that text.
The worst archetype, Boros Control. Past Swath Cutter Giant, Deafening Clarion, just not really the place to be, honestly.
Boros Control. Oh, I love it.
The best Manowar easily goes to Dream Eater. It's not often that you see a mythic Manowar, and Dream Eater really delivered. This card was absurd. This is the 4/3 Flyer Surveil 4 Flash Manowar. And those are the 2018 Limmies.
Great Limmies, Luis. Another year.
Anytime.
Another year in the books.